Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the transfer portal news and some of the stuff that doesn't really get talked about too much. You always see the players coming into programs, don't always compare them to the players that are walking out. So it's a little bit tough to contextualize. CBS did a huge favor for us by contextualizing it a little bit better. So that was really fun to break down. But let's get to the Big Ten and let's talk about win totals, who's too high, who's too low, who is just right, who's absolutely on the money. But it starts obviously with the two teams up top, and those are the two teams that everyone's talking about around this time around the Big Ten. It's Ohio State and it's Oregon. Much like Texas and UGA in the SEC, they're kind of setting the pace for everyone else in the conference. I think Ohio State is likely has their nose just a little bit out in front, but when you look at these two schedules, it's going to be really two teams that likely will go 11-1, maybe even 12-0. It really will decide who wins that game, and Eugene might just decide who goes undefeated, who goes 11-1, if I'm being totally honest. But these are the two teams definitely setting the pace in this conference, and they're followed pretty closely up by Penn State and Michigan at 9.5 wins. So I think both these teams are going to be really good. They don't want to be below Ohio State. I can almost promise you that. But they absolutely have the potential to, win that game when they do get a shot at them, because both these teams absolutely do. So we'll figure that out. We'll figure out who actually deserves to be above who, and how Penn State matches up, how Michigan matches up. But I think both these teams have undefeated potential. I think both these teams have 8-4 potential. So it's kind of an interesting situation there. I think they're right where they should be, but it's going to be an interesting season for both these teams, definitely. And then you get to the 7.5 teams, no 8.5 win totals, which is very interesting for this conference. But the 7.5, the 7.5 is likely where this is going to be decided. A lot of the conferences, you'll find there are a couple of teams in kind of the middle of the pack. The teams that aren't necessarily good enough to win a conference title, which I would technically think a lot of these teams, Washington, USC, Nebraska, Iowa, I think they all likely will not win the Big Ten this upcoming year. But I do think they will have plenty to say with the guys that have a chance to win the Big Ten, where they're going to play some of the games against Michigan, Penn State, Oregon, Ohio State, and all of these teams can compete with those teams. So there's going to be an upset or two in this group, and there's going to be a couple of teams in this group that might just really mess it up for other people and live above their potential. There might be a couple of teams that, go a little bit under what they are capable of doing. So it'll be fascinating to watch those teams. I think those are likely the teams that we'll look back on and say they decided the Big Ten in a lot of different ways. And then you get to the 6.5 teams. You have Maryland, Wisconsin, Rutgers. Rutgers is doing a lot of really good things. I think they're starting to move up in this world and starting to kind of become a better program in the Big Ten. Greg Schiano's done a great job over there in the last couple of years. Wisconsin, I really like, if I'm being totally honest. They're all kind of fighting an uphill battle with some of the talent gap that they're dealing with, but I think this is a really fun group of teams, and I think they have the ability to make some noise, maybe, spring an upset here and there and totally mess up someone's season from time to time. And then you get to the 5.5 teams. You have Illinois, Indiana, Minnesota, Northwestern, and UCLA. All of these teams will likely have not a lot to say about the conference, but there's always that one, right? There's always that one team that, one game that they play just out of their minds. It's like the Purdue game against Ohio State in 2018, where it doesn't make a lot of sense. You don't really know how it happened or why it happened, but they won that game. And I feel like this group is definitely one of those that can do that. I think Indiana's a really fun one to watch with a lot of guys coming over from JMU. I think Northwestern is fascinating to watch with David Braun going into his second full-time year as the head coach over there. So it'll be fascinating to watch what happens there. And then the 4.5 teams are Michigan State and Penn State, the teams that you're not going to hear much from them. I'll be totally honest. For some reason it says 2.5 there. The number is 4.5. I apologize for that. But both these teams are fighting a really, really hard battle this year, and it's going to be kind of a slow build under the two coaches there right now, Ryan Walters at Purdue and Jonathan Smith at Michigan State, but I think they're going to be okay programs. I just think it's going to take some time to get there, and 2024 is not going to be that year. Let's just put it that way. But let's get to who I think is too high, too low, and right on the money. And let's start with too high. And I think Washington's just a little bit too high. I'm fully prepared to be wrong about this team. I think that it's very possible that I will be. I was probably wrong when I was talking about Arizona this time last year. But I don't think this team has a Noah Fafita on it. I just don't know if, they have the quarterback talent that they need to really compete in this conference and to even win 7, or I think they could win 6 games. I think that's likely where they'll probably end up. Maybe I'm being a little bit low on the Huskies, and I'm sure Jed Fish will let me know that if I am. But at the end of the day, I just don't necessarily love this team as much as some other people might. And then Maryland, losing Tualia and JShawn Barham, you're at 6.5 for a win total, so you could definitely still get there. Mike Locksley is still going to make games interesting, but I just don't know if they have that big time player that they need on both sides of the ball to really compete with some of these teams. So don't necessarily love that one either. And then UCLA at 5.5. I think it's going to be a rough transition into the Big Ten for UCLA. I think the physicality, the talent, the money gap, all of the stuff is going to be huge hurdles for them to get over. And I think Deshaun Foster, is going to be a success over there. I just think it's going to take some time, and this is going to be probably the low point for the Bruins. Too low, I have Nebraska at 7.5, Wisconsin at 6.5. I think Nebraska is a team that could totally flip this conference on its head. If Dylan Raiola plays just good football, I think they're a 9-3 level team, maybe even 10-2 team. The defense is going to be top 10 in the country likely. They're going to be able to do some things that are just really remarkable. So I really like that team. I think they're probably going to get maybe even up to 9-10 wins this upcoming season. And then Wisconsin at 6.5. I just feel like Tyler Van Dyke is a perfect fit in this program. I don't have, too much evidence necessarily to support that. I just think a change of scenery for this kid. The run game, I think, is going to be much better than it was a year ago at Miami. I think things are just going to go really well for him at Wisconsin, if I'm being totally honest. I'm just making that bet right now. So I really like this Wisconsin team. I think they have more about them than you would think. And then the other ones I think are relatively on the money. There are a couple like Iowa and Michigan that might be a touch too low, if I'm being totally honest. And then Rutgers and Illinois might be a little bit too high. Frankly, Rutgers I'm actually okay with. I'm kind of in between on that one. Illinois I think might be just a touch too high. It's a really good group overall, and I think it's going to be a really hard-fought conference. Obviously, with no one have a win total under 4.5, it's going to be a hard-fought conference. There's no two ways about that. So it'll be fascinating to watch. Obviously, Ohio State and Oregon kind of setting the pace out there. But this is going to be a conference that is going to come down to that group in the middle. The USC, Iowa, Wisconsin, Nebraska, all those teams are likely going to decide this conference because one of those teams is going to trip up one of the big guys. I can almost promise you that. And that game is going to be one we look back on and say, that might have been the one that kind of did Oregon in, or did Ohio State in, or did Michigan in, whatever team it is. Some team is going to trip up on one of those guys, and it's going to be fascinating to watch, that's for sure. But let's take our third break here, and when we come back, we're going to do a Cinderella watch for the Big Ten. We're going to break down two teams that I think definitely will have a lot to say about the Big Ten and could make some noise not only in the Big Ten, but maybe in the playoff if they get there. So I want to break down who those two teams are and why I think they have a lot to really gain this upcoming year right after this, so stick with us.